CNT125 switches in VLANs lab. I just got done configuring my bottom switch, and remember the little note that's here. Once you have your PuTTY console connection set up, I don't need to close this out and restart this program. I can leave it active, and I literally can move the blue console cable from one switch to the other one, hit the enter key, and keep going. So right now I'm on the bottom switch. If I move the console cable to the top switch and hit the enter key a couple times, you should see that prompt change. So that's also another good reason our prompts need to have, the switcher or router hostname needs to have something in it to identify what device it is. That's really helpful. Alright, so I've done that. I've done my bottom switch, so I have both switches configured identical. Remember, as you do the bottom switch, let me do a show run here real quick. Make sure as you set the IP, you have not conflicted the first switch. The first switch was 172.16.1.101, so my second switch needs to be 102, so it does not conflict. Look out for that. If by chance you did that, just go back to the interface VLAN 1 and repeat the IP address command and make sure the correct IP address is in there. Alright, now that I have both switches configured, my client workstations, I previously set their IP addresses. I am going to make sure that I take both PCs, their patch cables, and I'm going to plug them together. Previously, one was in the top switch, one was in the bottom. Right now, I'm going to take both of those PCs, plug them in the top switch in the ports 1 to 5 range. That way, they're on the same switch in the same VLAN. So at this point in time, if I were to ping from PC to PC, so right here is my my PC1, I'm going to ping PC2, 172.16.1.202 should be that guy. I get a successful ping. And that should make sense because they're both in VLAN 10. If I were to move both of them, which I'm going to do, I'm going to take both of these PCs, and I'm going to move them, as the lab tells you here, I'm going to move them into the ports 6 to 10 range, or VLAN 20. So I'm going to move them over, 6 to 10. In this case, I'm using 7 and 9, just because that's my easy connections. When I do that, I'll notice the link light goes orange for a little bit. I do need to be patient and let that settle till it's green. Once it is, I will then ping them. Now, right now, I have moved both of these PCs into VLAN 20 on the top switch. So once those ports settle, I should get a successful ping. Now, I'm going to be nerdy here and do this ping with a -T. -T does a continuous ping. So I'm going to hit the enter key on that. And actually, by the time I did it, the port settled. I'm getting a successful ping. Control-C will stop that continuous ping. Control-C. So now that they're both in VLAN 20, I'm getting successful ping. And again, that should make sense. They're in the same VLAN. They should be able to be communicating with each other. As I go on to the next page, I'm going to move them. I'm going to move them now. That one of the PCs, PC1, is in VLAN 10, and the other PC is in VLAN 20. So I'm going to reach up here, and I'm going to move my first PC, the one that I'm currently on. I'm going to move it back to port 1. So I now have one of these in port 1 and one of these in port 9. They are in separate VLANs. And as I look at this, logic should tell me that they're in separate VLANs. I should not have communication between them because the VLAN should be stopping that communication. So I'm going to reissue the ping here. I'm going to do the continuous. I'm watching my link lights up there. There's still, one is green, one is orange. We'll let him settle. They're now both green. Now that they're both green, I should now be looking at my ping results and I see destination unreachable. And that's right. The switch is stopping these two workstations from communicating because they are in separate VLANs. That's the whole point of our VLAN, stopping that communication between them. I'll use the Control-C to stop that ping. That does not need to stay pinging away there. Come on. There we go. I had to click in the window before it took my Control C. Now, let's try one more thing. We know when they're in the same VLAN, they're pinging. When they're in different VLANs, they're not pinging. They're not communicating. That makes sense. Well, now let's try one more thing. I'm going to take my PC1. I'm going to leave it in that port 1 to 5. I'm going to take PC2, and I'm going to put it in 1 to 5 on the bottom switch. So I'm going to do that first. I'm going to take this second PC, and I'm going to move it down to the bottom switch. So now I have PC1 in the top switch in port 1. That's VLAN 10. I have PC2 in the bottom switch, port 1 to 5, if you will, port 1 to 5, and that is VLAN 10. So right now, both of these PCs are in VLAN 10, but they are on separate switches. So we're going to try the ping between them and see what happens. So again, I'm going to get my ping ready. I'm waiting for my ports to settle, and it looks like both are green right now. So I'm going to try this. I'll leave the continuous ping run as well. We're going to try this and see what happens. We're getting destination unreachable. There is a crossover cable between the switches, and it worked previously, but that crossover cable between the switches is not configured to do anything with VLANs. So that crossover cable between the switches is just a connection, but it's not in the VLAN we're in. So it's not able to communicate VLAN traffic or belong in a VLAN. So for us to be able to communicate across that link between switches, we need to configure that link between the two switches. So we're going to end up doing that in the next part. Now let me stop my trace here. Control C will stop my ping. There we go. Come on, you can do it. There we go. So let's think that through. We have the two switches. Both PCs are in VLAN 10 on separate switches. As it tries to communicate across that orange crossover between the two switches, that link is not configured to do anything with those VLANs. So we're going to need to configure that link to do stuff with those VLANs, VLAN traffic. We need to configure that link between the two switches as a trunk link. So it actually processes that VLAN traffic. All right, now we're simulating that those two switches are next to each other in the same equipment rack, but these could actually be in separate closets in a building or on separate floors in a building. So that's kind of why we're saying top and bottom here, maybe the top floor, bottom floor kind of thing in a building. All right, I'm going to scroll down here and let's configure this trunk. Now right now I'm on the bottom switch, so let me reach over here real quick, and I'm going to move that console connection to the top switch. So I'm going to move the console cable up to the top switch, and we'll console back in. There we go. If you see now my prompt change. I didn't do anything with PuTTY. We'll do enable, and we need to configure the trunk on, well, let's look at our map up here. We are going to configure the trunk on port 24 on this switch and port 24 on this switch. So let's do that. Down in here, keep going. There we go. Okay. So on this switch, we need to do configure terminal or config T. We need to select that interface, fast Ethernet 0/24. We're using 24 because that's what we have cabled in or plugged in. I could configure this on a gigabit port as long as that's what I have cabled between the two switches. So we're going to use the 24 because that's what we're currently cabled in. We're going to say switch port mode trunk. As opposed to access mode, we're doing trunk mode. And what that just told the switch was, hey, any traffic that comes across here, start doing this frame tagging thing so we know what VLAN it belongs to. Now, I'm going to exit, and let's do a show. What do I have you do first here? I have you do a show run. So let's do a show run. And if we take a look, we'll see down here next to port 24, we see trunking on there. Yahoo. And if I do a show VLAN, I'll see that my port 24 no longer shows up here. It doesn't belong to a VLAN. It is a trunk port. So it's going to do my frame tagging. I'll do a copy run start on this guy. And then I'm going to move the console cable down to my bottom switch. And let's repeat this exact same thing. Let's repeat this exact same thing. So bottom switch, config T, interface, fast Ethernet 0/24. We want to do switch port mode trunk. Exit. I'm going to do a show run and make sure it is showing up. And it is. There he is. And if I do a show VLAN, I'll notice that it does not show in here anymore because it is now a trunking port. I'll do a copy, run, start on this guy. There we go. So I have both of those configured for trunking. And if I remember correctly, I left my PCs. PC1 was in the top switch in ports 1 to 5 VLAN 10. PC2 was in the bottom switch, ports 1 to 5 and VLAN 10. So if my trunking has worked correctly, then my ping between my two switches should now work. And it does. And what that shows now is as that traffic got to that trunk port, that port 24, it tagged it as saying this belongs to VLAN 10, and when it got to the other switch, it knew to pass it out the VLAN 10 port to get to that PC. So that worked. Now what I'm going to do is move both of these PCs. I'm moving PC1 over to port 7, and I'm moving PC2 over to port 7. I'll let those settle for a minute. You'll notice I'm seeing some interface adjustments here on my console. I'm going to let those settle, and I'll try a ping from VLAN 20 to VLAN 20. And that's basically what we're doing right here. We did this first test here. Now we're doing this test here. We're going to let those ports settle. It looks like they're still orange. We'll give them a couple more seconds. And then we'll try our ping. And it looks like we're up and going. So now VLAN 20 can talk to VLAN 20 even though they're on separate switches, which again would be useful if I have switches in two different closets in a building or switches in two different floors on a building. VLAN 10 traffic can talk to VLAN 10 traffic on this floor could talk to VLAN traffic, VLAN 10 traffic on another floor or another wing. Alrighty, excellent. The only thing left to do is gather some configuration for submission to D2L. So let's do that while I'm on my switch here. I'm on the bottom switch, that's the one I'll use. I'll do a show run. And I also want to do a show VLAN. I want both of these here. So we'll do show VLAN. And I'm going to scroll up so I get my show run command the whole way down to show VLAN. Keep going. Copy, copy, copy. I'm going to right-click copy. Oh, my goodness. Control-Shift-6X will get you out of that. There we go. All right. Mr. Brown doing crazy pace here. So we need to do our show run again and then our show VLAN. Show run. That happens. Show run. And then we're going to do a show VLAN again. Show VLAN. And we'll highlight these guys and we will copy paste. So let's scroll up here. There's my show run. And I'll just do a Control C to copy. I'll open something like my notepad. And I will paste this in, right click paste. And now I have my show run and my show VLAN from the bottom switch. And I will save it as so, save as. I'll go to my documents here and call it something like, 125 bottom switch config or something like that. And I might even want to put in here switches lab or something like that so I know for myself what it is. 125 switches, bottom switch config.txt and save that. I would repeat this for the top switch, move the console cable over to the top switch, grab the same thing. The only thing left after that is we do need to do a little bit of cleanup and then our questions. I'm going to come back in the last podcast to show you the cleanup and then our questions.